Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 2 of our complete practice question series for the CLF-C02 AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 2. Question number 62. A company has moved its IT infrastructure from an on-premises data center to the AWS cloud. Which cost remains the company's direct responsibility? Option A, cost of application software licenses. Option B, cost of the hardware infrastructure on AWS. Option C, cost of power for the AWS servers. Option D, cost of physical security for the AWS data center. The correct answer is A, cost of application software licenses. Here's why. Customers are responsible for licensing and managing the application software they run in AWS. Why are the other options not correct? B, AWS owns and maintains the underlying hardware infrastructure. C, AWS pays for power used by infrastructure in its data centers. D, AWS manages physical security for AWS data centers. Exam tip. AWS manages data center infrastructure. Customers manage their applications and licenses. Question number 63. A company is configuring AWS Identity and Access Management, IAM, for an AWS account. Which recommendation follows IAM security best practices? Option A, use the account root user access keys for administrative tasks. Option B, grant broad permissions so that all company employees can access the resources they need. Option C, turn on multi-factor authentication, MFA, for added security during the login process. Option D, avoid rotating credentials to prevent issues in production applications. The correct answer is C, turn on multi-factor authentication, MFA, for added security. Here's why. MFA requires an additional authentication factor and reduces the risk from a compromised password. Why are the other options not correct? A, root access keys should not be used for routine administrative tasks. B, broad permissions violate the principle of least privilege. D, credentials should be rotated or replaced with temporary credentials where possible. Exam tip. Protect privileged identities with MFA and grant only the permissions they require. Question number 64. A company has 5 terabytes of data stored in Amazon S3 and plans to run queries on the data occasionally for analysis. Which AWS service should the company use to run these queries in the most cost-effective manner? Option A, Amazon Redshift. Option B, Amazon Athena. Option C, Amazon Kinesis. Option D, Amazon RDS. The correct answer is B, Amazon Athena. Here's why. Athena runs serverless SQL queries directly against data in Amazon S3 and charges based on data scanned. Why are the other options not correct? A, Redshift is a data warehouse and adds unnecessary infrastructure for occasional queries. C, Kinesis processes real-time, streaming data. D, Amazon RDS is a managed relational database service. Exam tip. Use Athena for occasional serverless SQL analysis of data stored in Amazon S3. Question number 65. According to the AWS shared responsibility model, which task remains the customer's responsibility when using AWS Lambda? Option A, managing the code within the Lambda function. Option B, confirming that the hardware is working in the data center. Option C, patching the operating system. Option D, shutting down Lambda functions when they are no longer in use. The correct answer is A, managing the code within the Lambda function. Here's why. Customers manage their Lambda function code, permissions, dependencies, and data. Why are the other options not correct? B, AWS manages the physical hardware and data center infrastructure. C, AWS patches the operating system and managed Lambda runtime infrastructure. D, Lambda runs functions on demand, so customers do not shut down servers or functions. Exam tip. With Lambda, AWS manages infrastructure. Customers manage code, data, and permissions. Question number 66. Which AWS service is available at no additional cost? Option A, Amazon SageMaker. Option B, AWS Config. Option C, AWS organizations. Option D, Amazon CloudWatch. The correct answer is C, AWS organizations. Here's why. AWS organizations is available at no additional charge, although resources used by member accounts are billed normally. Why are the other options not correct? A. SageMaker AI charges for the resources and services used. B. AWS config charges for configuration items, evaluations, and related usage. D. CloudWatch includes limited free usage but can incur charges beyond those allowances. Exam tip. AWS organizations has no additional service charge. Member account resources still cost. Question number 67. Which AWS Cloud Adoption Framework, AWS CAF, capability is part of the people perspective? Option A, data architecture. Option B, event management. Option C, cloud fluency. Option D, strategic partnership. The correct answer is C, cloud fluency. Here's why. Cloud fluency is a people perspective capability that develops cloud knowledge and skills across the workforce. Why are the other options not correct? A. Data architecture belongs to the platform perspective. B. Event management belongs to the operations perspective. D. Strategic partnership belongs to the business perspective. Exam tip. The AWS CAF people perspective covers culture, workforce, leadership, and cloud skills. Question number 68. A company wants to make an upfront commitment for continued use of its production Amazon EC2 instances in exchange for a lower overall cost. Which pricing options meet these requirements with the lowest cost? Choose 2. Option A, spot instances. Option B, on-demand instances. Option C, reserved instances. Option D, savings plans. E, dedicated hosts. The correct answer is C, reserved instances. D, savings plans. Here's why. Reserved instances and savings plans provide discounted pricing in exchange for continued usage commitments. Why are the other options not correct? A. Spot instances can be interrupted and do not require a usage commitment. B. On-demand instances provide no commitment-based discount. E. Dedicated hosts address licensing or isolation and are not the lowest cost default. Exam tip. Use RI or savings plans discounts for predictable production usage. Question number 69. A company is evaluating the AWS cloud and needs to create a project cost estimate before the infrastructure is provisioned. Which AWS service or feature can be used to estimate costs before deployment? Option A, AWS free tier. Option B, AWS pricing calculator. Option C, AWS billing and cost management. Option D, AWS cost and usage report. The correct answer is B, AWS pricing calculator. Here's why. AWS pricing calculator estimates the cost of planned AWS services before resources are deployed. Why are the other options not correct? A. AWS free tier provides limited free usage rather than a project cost estimate. C. Billing and cost management manages costs after an account begins using services. D. Cost and usage reports provide detailed records of actual usage and charges. Exam tip. Pricing calculator estimates planned cost before deployment. Question number 70. A company is developing an application that uses multiple AWS services. The application needs temporary, limited privilege credentials for authenticating with other AWS APIs. Which AWS service or feature should the company use to meet these authentication requirements? Option A, Amazon API Gateway. Option B, IAM users. Option C, AWS Security Token Service, AWS STS. Option D, IAM Instance Profiles. The correct answer is C, AWS Security Token Service, AWS STS. Here's why. AWS STS issues temporary, limited privilege credentials for authenticated access to AWS APIs. Why are the other options not correct? A. API Gateway creates and manages application APIs. B. IAM users generally use long-term credentials rather than temporary credentials. D. Instance profiles deliver IAM role credentials specifically to Amazon EC2 instances. Exam tip. AWS STS provides temporary credentials. IAM roles commonly obtain credentials from STS. Question number 71. A network engineer needs to build a hybrid cloud architecture that connects on-premises networks to the AWS cloud using AWS Direct Connect. The company has a few VPCs in a single AWS region and expects the number of VPCs to grow into the hundreds over time. Which AWS service or feature should the engineer use to simplify and scale this connectivity as the VPCs increase in number? Option A, VPC endpoints. Option B, AWS Transit Gateway. Option C, Amazon Route 53. Option D, AWS Secrets Manager. The correct answer is B, AWS Transit Gateway. Here's why. Transit Gateway provides a scalable central hub for connecting many VPCs and on-premises networks. Why are the other options not correct? A, VPC endpoints provide private access to supported services. C, Route 53 provides DNS and traffic routing. D, Secrets Manager stores and rotates application secrets. Exam tip. Transit Gateway simplifies connectivity when many VPCs and hybrid networks are involved. Question number 72. Which AWS service is used to provide encryption for Amazon EBS volumes? Option A, AWS Certificate Manager. Option B, AWS Systems Manager. Option C, AWS KMS. Option D, AWS Config. The correct answer is C, AWS KMS. Here's why. Amazon EBS integrates with AWS KMS to encrypt volumes and snapshots by using cryptographic keys. Why are the other options not correct? A, Certificate Manager provisions and manages supported TLS certificates. B, Systems Manager helps operate and manage AWS resources. D, AWS Config records resource configurations and evaluates compliance. Exam tip. AWS KMS manages the keys used for encryption by services such as Amazon EBS. Question number 73. Which option is an AWS Cloud Adoption Framework, AWS CAF, capability in the platform perspective? Option A, Data Architecture. Option B, Data Protection. Option C, Data Governance. Option D, Data Science. The correct answer is A, Data Architecture. Here's why. Data Architecture is an AWS CAF platform perspective capability covering data platforms and structures. Why are the other options not correct? B, Data Protection belongs to the security perspective. C, Data Governance belongs to the governance perspective. D, Data Science belongs to the business perspective. Exam tip. The platform perspective includes platform, data, and application architecture. Question number 74. A company has multiple AWS accounts with compute workloads that cannot be interrupted. The company wants billing discounts based on its use of AWS services. Which AWS feature or purchasing option will meet these requirements? Option A, resource tagging. Option B, consolidated billing. Option C, pay-as-you-go pricing. Option D, spot instances. The correct answer is B, consolidated billing. Here's why. Consolidated billing combines account usage and can share volume, reserved instance, and savings plans discounts. Why are the other options not correct? A, resource tags categorize resources and costs, but do not create usage-based discounts. C, pay-as-you-go pricing charges for usage without providing combined account discounts. D, spot instances can be interrupted and do not meet the workload requirement. Exam tip. Consolidated billing can combine usage across accounts for shared pricing benefits. Question number 75. A user wants applications running on an Amazon EC2 instance to call other AWS services. The access granted must be secure. Which AWS service or feature should be used? Option A, security groups. Option B, AWS Firewall Manager. Option C, IAM roles. Option D, IAM user SSH keys. The correct answer is C. IAM roles. Here's why. An IAM role gives applications on EC2 temporary credentials without storing long-term access keys. Why are the other options not correct? A. Security groups control network traffic, not AWS API permissions. B. Firewall manager centrally manages firewall and security policies. D. SSH keys authenticate operating system access and do not authorize AWS API calls. Exam tip. Assign an IAM role to EC2 instead of embedding access keys in applications. Question number 76. Which AWS service or feature provides log information for inbound and outbound traffic on network interfaces in AVPC? Option A. Amazon CloudWatch logs. Option B. AWS CloudTrail. Option C. VPC flow logs. Option D. AWS Identity and Access Management, IAM. The correct answer is C. VPC flow logs. Here's why. VPC flow logs record information about IP traffic to and from network interfaces in AVPC. Why are the other options not correct? A. CloudWatch log stores and analyzes logs, but does not itself generate VPC traffic records. B. CloudTrail records supported AWS API and account activity. D. IAM manages identities and permissions. Exam tip. VPC flow logs record network traffic metadata. CloudTrail records API activity. Question number 77. Which AWS service gives users the ability to discover and protect sensitive data stored in Amazon S3 buckets? Option A. Amazon Macie. Option B. Amazon Detective. Option C. Amazon Guard Duty. Option D. AWS IAM Access Analyzer. The correct answer is A. Amazon Macie. Here's why. Amazon Macie discovers and helps protect sensitive data stored in Amazon S3. Why are the other options not correct? B. Detective helps investigate security findings and suspicious activity. C. Guard Duty detects threats from supported logs and data sources. D. IAM Access Analyzer identifies external, internal, and unused access. Exam tip. Macie discovers sensitive S3 data. Guard Duty detects threats. Question number 78. Which tasks are customer responsibilities under the AWS Shared Responsibility Model? Choose 2. Option A. Configure the AWS Provided Security Group Firewall. Option B. Classify company assets in the AWS Cloud. Option C. Determine which availability zones to use for Amazon S3 buckets. Option D. Patch or upgrade Amazon DynamoDB. E. Select Amazon EC2 instances to run AWS Lambda on. The correct answer is A. Configure the AWS Provided Security Group Firewall. B. Classify company assets in the AWS Cloud. Here's why. Customers configure network access controls and classify their own data and cloud assets. Why are the other options not correct? C. Customers select an S3 region, but AWS manages the availability zones used by S3. D. AWS patches and upgrades the managed DynamoDB service. E. AWS selects and manages the infrastructure that runs Lambda. Exam tip. Customers manage data classification and security configuration, even for managed services. Question number 79. Which of the following is a software development framework that a company can use to define cloud resources as code and provision those resources through AWS CloudFormation? Option A. AWS CLI. Option B. AWS Developer Center. Option C. AWS Cloud Development Kit, AWS CDK. Option D. AWS CodeStar. The correct answer is C. AWS Cloud Development Kit, AWS CDK. Here's why. AWS CDK lets developers define cloud resources in programming languages and synthesizes CloudFormation templates. Why are the other options not correct? A. AWS CLI runs commands to manage AWS services. B. AWS Developer Center provides development resources and documentation. D. CodeStar provided tools for managing software development projects. Exam tip. AWS CDK defines infrastructure in code and deploys it through CloudFormation. Question number 80. A company wants to migrate its on-premises relational databases to the AWS cloud. It wants to use infrastructure as close to its current geographic location as possible. Which AWS service or resource should the company use to select its Amazon RDS deployment area? Option A, Amazon Connect. Option B, AWS Wavelength. Option C, AWS Regions. Option D, AWS Direct Connect. The correct answer is C, AWS Regions. Here's why. The company selects an AWS region near its location when deploying Amazon RDS. Why are the other options not correct? A. Amazon Connect is a cloud contact center service. B. Wavelength places workloads near mobile carrier networks for low-latency applications. D. Direct Connect provides dedicated connectivity between on-premises and AWS. Exam tip. Select a region based on proximity, compliance, service availability, and cost. Question number 81. A company wants to migrate its on-premises NFS workload to AWS. Which AWS storage gateway type should the company use to meet this requirement? Option A, Tape Gateway. Option B, Volume Gateway. Option C, Amazon FSx File Gateway. Option D, Amazon S3 File Gateway. The correct answer is D, Amazon S3 File Gateway. Here's why. S3 File Gateway presents NFS file shares to on-premises clients and stores files as objects in Amazon S3. Why are the other options not correct? A. Tape Gateway provides virtual tape storage for backup applications. B. Volume Gateway provides block storage volumes through ISCSI. C. FSx File Gateway provides access to Amazon FSx for Windows File Server through SMB. Exam tip. S3 File Gateway supports NFS and SMB access backed by Amazon S3. Question number 82. A company needs to track activity in its AWS accounts and know when an API call is made against its AWS resources. Which AWS tool or service can be used to meet these requirements? Option A, Amazon CloudWatch. Option B, Amazon Inspector. Option C, AWS CloudTrail. Option D, AWS IAM. The correct answer is C, AWS CloudTrail. Here's why. CloudTrail records supported AWS API calls and account activity for auditing and investigation. Why are the other options not correct? A. CloudWatch monitors metrics, logs, alarms, and application operations. B. Inspector scans supported workloads for vulnerabilities and exposure. D. IAM manages identities and permissions. Exam tip. CloudTrail records API activity. CloudWatch monitors operational performance. Question number 83. A company wants an AWS service that can provide product recommendations based on customer data. Which AWS service will meet this requirement? Option A, Amazon Poly. Option B, Amazon Personalize. Option C, Amazon Comprehend. Option D, Amazon Recognition. The correct answer is B, Amazon Personalize. Here's why. Amazon Personalize uses customer interaction and item data to create personalized recommendations. Why are the other options not correct? A. Amazon Poly converts text into speech. C. Amazon Comprehend extracts insights from text. D. Amazon Recognition analyzes images and video. Exam tip. Personalize creates recommendations. Comprehend analyzes text. Question number 84. A company runs thousands of simultaneous simulations using AWS Batch. Each simulation is stateless, fault-tolerant, and runs for up to 3 hours. Which pricing model enables the company to optimize costs and meet these requirements? Option A, reserved instances. Option B, spot instances. Option C, on-demand instances. Option D, dedicated instances. The correct answer is B, spot instances. Here's why. Spot instances provide discounted spare EC2 capacity for stateless, fault-tolerant simulations that can handle interruption. Why are the other options not correct? A. Reserved instances require a commitment and are less flexible for bursty batch processing. C. On-demand instances avoid commitments, but usually cost more than spot. D. Dedicated instances provide isolation that the workload does not require. Exam tip. Spot is ideal for fault-tolerant batch jobs that can recover from interruptions. Question number 85. Which service enables customers to audit API calls within their AWS accounts? Option A. AWS CloudTrail. Option B. AWS Trusted Advisor. Option C. Amazon Inspector. Option D. AWS X-Ray. The correct answer is A. AWS CloudTrail. Here's why. CloudTrail records supported API calls and account events for governance and auditing. Why are the other options not correct? B. Trusted Advisor provides best practice recommendations. C. Inspector performs vulnerability management for supported workloads. D. X-Ray traces requests through distributed applications. Exam tip. Use CloudTrail to determine who performed an AWS API action and when. Question number 86. A company needs to perform weekly data processing that typically takes about 5 hours to complete. Which AWS service should the company use for this workload? Option A. AWS Lambda. Option B. Amazon EC2. Option C. AWS Code Deploy. Option D. AWS Wavelength. The correct answer is B. Amazon EC2. Here's why. EC2 can run the scheduled 5-hour processing workload without the execution time limit of Lambda. Why are the other options not correct? A. Lambda functions have a maximum execution duration and cannot run continuously for 5 hours. C. Code Deploy automates application deployments rather than running data processing workloads. D. Wavelength supports low-latency applications at telecommunications network edges. Exam tip. Use EC2 or a batch service for long-running jobs that exceed Lambda execution limits. Question number 87. A company wants to design a centralized storage system to manage configuration data and passwords for its critical business applications. Which AWS service or capability will meet these requirements most cost-effectively? Option A. AWS Systems Manager Parameter Store. Option B. AWS Secrets Manager. Option C. AWS Config. Option D. Amazon S3. The correct answer is A. AWS Systems Manager Parameter Store. Here's why. Parameter Store centrally stores configuration values and encrypted secure string parameters, with standard parameters available at no additional charge. Why are the other options not correct? B. Secrets Manager is designed for secrets and automatic rotation, but has additional charges. C. AWS Config tracks resource configurations and compliance. D. Amazon S3 is object storage and lacks purpose-built parameter management features. Exam tip. Use Parameter Store for cost-effective configuration and secret storage without rotation. Question number 88. A company is planning a migration to the AWS cloud. It is identifying capability gaps by using the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework, AWS CAF, perspectives. Which phase of the cloud transformation journey includes these identification activities? Option A. Envision. Option B. Align. Option C. Scale. Option D. Launch. The correct answer is B. Align. Here's why. The Align phase identifies capability gaps across AWS CAF perspectives and creates an action plan. Why are the other options not correct? A. Envision identifies transformation opportunities and desired business outcomes. C. Scale expands successful modernization and transformation across the organization. D. Launch delivers pilot initiatives and demonstrates incremental business value. Exam tip. Envision defines outcomes. Align finds capability gaps. Launch pilots. Scale expands. Question number 89. A social media company wants to protect its web application from common web exploits such as SQL injection and cross-site scripting. Which AWS service will meet these requirements? Option A. Amazon Inspector. Option B. AWS WAF. Option C. Amazon Guard Duty. Option D. Amazon CloudWatch. The correct answer is B. AWS WAF. Here's why. AWS WAF filters web requests and can block SQL injection and cross-site scripting patterns. Why are the other options not correct? A. Inspector scans supported workloads for vulnerabilities. C. Guard duty detects threats from supported logs and data sources. D. CloudWatch monitors metrics, logs, events, and alarms. Exam tip. WAF blocks common web exploits. Shield protects against DDoS attacks. Question number 90. Which fully managed AWS service helps create, test, and manage custom Amazon EC2 images? Option A. EC2 Image Builder. Option B. Amazon Machine Image, AMI. Option C. AWS Launch Wizard. Option D. AWS Elastic Beanstalk. The correct answer is A. EC2 Image Builder. Here's why. EC2 Image Builder automates creating, testing, maintaining, and distributing custom EC2 images. Why are the other options not correct? B. An AMI is an image definition, not the managed service that creates and tests images. C. Launch Wizard guides deployment of selected applications. D. Elastic Beanstalk deploys and manages applications. Exam tip. EC2 Image Builder automates secure and repeatable AMI creation and maintenance. Question number 91. A company wants an automated process that continuously scans its Amazon EC2 instances for software vulnerabilities. Which AWS service will meet these requirements? Option A. Amazon Guard Duty. Option B. Amazon Inspector. Option C. Amazon Detective. Option D. Amazon Cognito. The correct answer is B. Amazon Inspector. Here's why. Amazon Inspector continuously scans supported EC2 workloads for software vulnerabilities and unintended network exposure. Why are the other options not correct? A. Guard Duty detects threats from supported logs and data sources. C. Detective helps investigate security findings and suspicious activity. D. Cognito provides identity services for web and mobile applications. Exam tip. Inspector finds vulnerabilities. Guard Duty detects threats. Question number 92. Which AWS service or feature lets users create new AWS accounts, group multiple accounts to organize workflows, and apply policies to groups of accounts? Option A. AWS Identity and Access Management, IAM. Option B. AWS Trusted Advisor. Option C. AWS CloudFormation. Option D. AWS Organizations. The correct answer is D. AWS Organizations. Here's why. AWS Organizations creates and groups accounts into organizational units and applies central policies across those accounts. Why are the other options not correct? A. IAM manages identities and permissions within AWS environments. B. Trusted Advisor provides best practice recommendations. C. CloudFormation provisions infrastructure from templates. Exam tip. Organizations centrally manages accounts, organizational units, billing, and policies. Question number 93. A company wants to store and retrieve files in Amazon S3 for existing on-premises applications by using industry-standard file system protocols. Which AWS service will meet these requirements? Option A. AWS DataSync. Option B. AWS Snowball Edge. Option C. Amazon S3 File Gateway. Option D. AWS Transfer Family. The correct answer is C. Amazon S3 File Gateway. Here's why. S3 File Gateway presents NFS or SMB file shares to existing applications and stores the files as objects in Amazon S3. Why are the other options not correct? A. DataSync transfers data between storage systems, but does not provide persistent file shares. B. Snowball Edge supports offline data transfer and edge computing. D. Transfer Family provides managed SFTP, FTPS, FTP, and AS2 transfers. Exam tip. S3 File Gateway provides file protocol access backed by Amazon S3. Question number 94. A company wants to prevent SQL injection attacks. Which AWS service or feature should the company use to meet this requirement? Option A, AWS WAF. Option B, Network ACLs. Option C, Security Groups. Option D, AWS Certificate Manager, ACM. The correct answer is A, AWS WAF. Here's why. AWS WAF inspects web requests and can block malicious SQL injection patterns. Why are the other options not correct? B, Network ACLs filter network traffic without inspecting SQL syntax. C, Security Groups control network access but do not inspect application layer requests. D, ACM provisions and manages supported TLS certificates. Exam tip. WAF blocks web exploits. Network controls filter traffic by ports and addresses. Question number 95. A company wants a unified tool that provides a consistent method for interacting with AWS services. Which AWS service or tool will meet this requirement? Option A, AWS CLI. Option B, Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS. Option C, AWS Cloud9. Option D, AWS Virtual Private Network, AWS VPN. The correct answer is A, AWS CLI. Here's why. AWS CLI provides a consistent command line interface for interacting with many AWS services. Why are the other options not correct? B, Amazon ECS orchestrates container workloads. C, Cloud9 is a cloud-based development environment. D, AWS VPN provides encrypted network connectivity. Exam tip. Use AWS CLI for command line service management and SDKs for application integration. Question number 96. Which perspective in the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework, AWS CAF, includes configuration management and patch management capabilities? Option A, platform. Option B, operations. Option C, security. Option D, governance. The correct answer is B, operations. Here's why. The AWS CAF operations perspective includes configuration management and patch management capabilities. Why are the other options not correct? A, platform focuses on workload, application, and data architecture. C, security focuses on protecting data, workloads, and access. D, governance focuses on oversight, risk, compliance, and portfolio management. Exam tip. Operations covers monitoring, configuration, patching, incidents, and service management. Question number 97. Which option is shared between AWS and its customers under the AWS Shared Responsibility Model? Option A, configuration of Amazon EC2 instance operating systems. Option B, application file system server-side encryption. Option C, patch management. Option D, security of the physical infrastructure. The correct answer is C, patch management. Here's why. AWS patches underlying cloud infrastructure, while customers patch guest operating systems and applications for services such as EC2. Why are the other options not correct? A, customers configure the guest operating system on EC2. B, customers choose and configure encryption for their application file systems. D, AWS is responsible for physical infrastructure security. Exam tip. Patch responsibility changes with the service layer being managed. Question number 98. Which task is AWS responsible for under the AWS Shared Responsibility Model? Option A, enable client-side encryption for objects that are stored in Amazon S3. Option B, configure IAM security policies to comply with the principle of least privilege. Option C, patch the guest operating system on an Amazon EC2 instance. Option D, apply updates to the Nitro hypervisor. The correct answer is D, apply updates to the Nitro hypervisor. Here's why. AWS maintains and patches the virtualization infrastructure that supports Amazon EC2. Why are the other options not correct? A, customers configure client-side encryption for their data. B, customers configure IAM policies and least privilege permissions. C, customers patch the guest operating system on EC2 instances. Exam tip. AWS patches the hypervisor. Customers patch the EC2 guest operating system. Question number 99. Which option describes a benefit of economies of scale in cloud computing? Option A, the ability to trade variable expense for fixed expense. Option B, increased speed and agility. Option C, lower variable costs over fixed costs. Option D, increased operational costs across data centers. The correct answer is C, lower variable costs over fixed costs. Here's why. AWS achieves economies of scale by aggregating demand across many customers, helping reduce usage-based variable costs. Why are the other options not correct? A, cloud computing trades fixed expense for variable expense, not the reverse. B, speed and agility are separate cloud benefits. D, economies of scale reduce rather than increase data center operating costs. Exam tip. AWS economies of scale can provide lower variable prices than individual operations. Question number 100. Which of the following services can be used to control network traffic to an instance? Choose 2. Option A, security groups. Option B, Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, Amazon VPC, flow logs. Option C, network ACLs. Option D, Amazon CloudWatch. E, AWS CloudTrail. The correct answer is A, security groups. C, network ACLs. Here's why. Security groups control traffic to resources, while network ACLs allow or deny traffic at the subnet boundary. Why are the other options not correct? B, VPC flow logs record traffic metadata, but do not block traffic. D, CloudWatch monitors resources and applications. E, CloudTrail records supported AWS API and account activity. Exam tip. Security groups are stateful resource controls. Network ACLs are stateless subnet controls. Question number 101. Which AWS service can identify when an Amazon EC2 instance was terminated and who performed the action? Option A, AWS Identity and Access Management, IAM. Option B, AWS CloudTrail. Option C, AWS Compute Optimizer. Option D, Amazon Event Bridge. The correct answer is B, AWS CloudTrail. Here's why. CloudTrail records EC2 API activity, including the termination request and the identity that made it. Why are the other options not correct? A, IAM manages identities and permissions. C, Compute Optimizer recommends resource configurations. D, Event Bridge can react to events, but is not the primary historical API audit record. Exam tip. Use CloudTrail to identify who performed an AWS API action and when. Question number 102. Which of the following is a fully managed database that is compatible with MySQL? Option A, Amazon S3. Option B, Amazon DynamoDB. Option C, Amazon Redshift. Option D, Amazon Aurora. The correct answer is D, Amazon Aurora. Here's why. Amazon Aurora is a fully managed relational database compatible with MySQL and PostgreSQL. Why are the other options not correct? A, Amazon S3 provides object storage. B, DynamoDB is a NoSQL key value and document database. C, Redshift is a managed data warehouse. Exam tip. Aurora is relational and MySQL or PostgreSQL compatible. DynamoDB is NoSQL. Question number 103. Which AWS service supports a hybrid architecture that extends AWS infrastructure, AWS services, APIs, and tools to data centers, colocation environments, or on-premises facilities? Option A, AWS Snowmobile. Option B, AWS Local Zones. Option C, AWS Outposts. Option D, AWS Fargate. The correct answer is C, AWS Outposts. Here's why. AWS Outposts extends AWS infrastructure, services, APIs, and tools into customer data centers and colocation facilities. Why are the other options not correct? A, Snowmobile transfers extremely large datasets to AWS. B, Local zones place selected AWS services near metropolitan users. D. Fargate provides serverless compute for containers. Exam tip. Outpost brings AWS infrastructure and services into an on-premises location. Question number 104. Which AWS service can run a managed PostgreSQL database for online transaction processing? OLTP. Option A. Amazon DynamoDB. Option B. Amazon Athena. Option C. Amazon RDS. Option D. Amazon EMR. The correct answer is C. Amazon RDS. Here's why. Amazon RDS supports fully managed PostgreSQL databases for relational OLTP workloads. Why are the other options not correct? A. DynamoDB is a NoSQL database. B. Athena performs serverless SQL queries against data in Amazon S3. D. EMR processes large datasets with big data frameworks. Exam tip. Use RDS for managed relational engines such as PostgreSQL. Question number 105. A company wants to provide managed Windows virtual desktops and applications to remote employees over secure network connections. Which AWS services can the company use to meet these requirements? Choose 2. Option A. Amazon Connect. Option B. Amazon AppStream 2.0. Option C. Amazon Workspaces. Option D. AWS Site-to-Site VPN. E. Amazon Elastic Container Service. Amazon ECS. The correct answer is B. Amazon AppStream 2.0. C. Amazon Workspaces. Here's why. AppStream 2.0 streams managed applications, while Workspaces provides managed virtual desktops for remote users. Why are the other options not correct? A. Amazon Connect is a cloud contact center service. D. Site-to-Site VPN connects networks but does not provide desktops or applications. E. Amazon ECS orchestrates containers. Exam tip. Workspaces provides desktops. AppStream 2.0 streams applications. Question number 106. Which AWS services or features provide disaster recovery options for Amazon EC2 instances? Choose 2. Option A. EC2 reserved instances. Option B. EC2 Amazon Machine Images, AMIs. Option C. Amazon Elastic Block Store, Amazon EBS, Snapshots. Option D. AWS Shield. E. Amazon Guard Duty. The correct answer is B. EC2 Amazon Machine Images, AMIs. C. Amazon Elastic Block Store, Amazon EBS, Snapshots. Here's why. AMIs capture information needed to launch replacement instances, while EBS snapshots provide recoverable copies of block storage volumes. Why are the other options not correct? A. Reserved instances are a pricing option. D. AWS Shield provides DDoS protection. E. Guard Duty provides threat detection. Exam tip. Use AMIs to recreate EC2 instances and EBS snapshots to recover volume data. Question number 107. A developer has been hired by a large company and needs AWS credentials. Which security best practices should be followed? Choose 2. Option A. Grant the developer access to only the AWS resources needed to perform the job. Option B. Share the AWS account root user credentials with the developer. Option C. Add the developer to the administrators group in AWS IAM. Option D. Configure a password policy that ensures the developer's password cannot be changed. E. Ensure the account password policy requires a minimum length. The correct answer is A. Grant access to only the AWS resources needed. E. Require a minimum password length. Here's why. Least privilege limits resource access, and a minimum password length strengthens password-based authentication. Why are the other options not correct? B. Root credentials must not be shared. C. Administrator access grants excessive permissions. D. Preventing password changes does not support secure credential management. Exam tip. Apply least privilege and enforce a strong IAM password policy. Question number 108. A company needs a fully managed Windows file server for its Windows-based applications. Which AWS service should it use? Option A. Amazon FSx. Option B, Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Service, Amazon EKS. Option C, Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS. Option D, Amazon EMR. The correct answer is A, Amazon FSx. Here's why. Amazon FSx for Windows File Server provides fully managed Windows file systems using the SMB protocol. Why are the other options not correct? B, Amazon EKS provides managed Kubernetes. C, Amazon ECS orchestrates containers. D, Amazon EMR runs supported big data processing frameworks. Exam tip. FSx for Windows File Server provides managed Windows-compatible shared file storage. Question number 109. A company is using a third-party service to back up 10 terabytes of data to a tape library. The on-premises backup server is running out of space. The company wants to use AWS services for the backups without changing its existing backup workflows. Which AWS service should the company use to meet these requirements? Option A, Amazon Elastic Block Store, Amazon EBS. Option B, AWS Storage Gateway. Option C, Amazon Elastic Container Service, Amazon ECS. Option D, AWS Lambda. The correct answer is B, AWS Storage Gateway. Here's why. Storage Gateway Tape Gateway presents virtual tapes to existing backup software and stores backup data in AWS. Why are the other options not correct? A, EBS provides block storage for supported compute resources. C, Amazon ECS orchestrates containers. D, Lambda runs event-driven code. Exam tip. Tape Gateway replaces physical tape libraries without changing tape-based workflows. Question number 110. A company is building an application that needs to deliver images and videos globally with minimal latency. Which approach can the company use to accomplish this in a cost-effective manner? Option A, deliver the content through Amazon CloudFront. Option B, store the content on Amazon S3 and enable S3 cross-region replication. Option C, implement a VPN across multiple AWS regions. Option D, deliver the content through AWS Private Link. The correct answer is A, deliver the content through Amazon CloudFront. Here's why. CloudFront caches and delivers content through global edge locations for low latency, cost-effective distribution. Why are the other options not correct? B, cross-region replication copies objects, but is not a global content delivery network. C, a multi-region VPN does not cache public content near users. D, Private Link provides private service connectivity. Exam tip. Use CloudFront to deliver images, videos, and web content globally with low latency. Question number 111. A company is using Amazon DynamoDB. Which task is the company's responsibility according to the AWS shared responsibility model? Option A, patch the operating system. Option B, provision hosts. Option C, manage database access permissions. Option D, secure the operating system. The correct answer is C, manage database access permissions. Here's why. Customers control identities and permissions that determine access to their DynamoDB tables and data. Why are the other options not correct? A, AWS patches the managed DynamoDB service infrastructure. B, AWS provisions and manages the underlying hosts. D, AWS secures and maintains the managed operating environment. Exam tip. With DynamoDB, AWS manages infrastructure. Customers manage data and access permissions. Question number 112. A company has a test AWS environment and is planning to test an application within AWS. The application testing can be interrupted and does not need to run continuously. Which Amazon EC2 purchasing option will meet these requirements most cost-effectively? Option A, on-demand instances. Option B, dedicated instances. Option C, spot instances. Option D, reserved instances. The correct answer is C, spot instances. Here's why. Spot instances provide discounted spare EC2 capacity for testing that can tolerate interruptions. Why are the other options not correct? A, On-demand avoids commitments, but normally costs more than spot. B. Dedicated instances provide isolation that the test does not require. D. Reserved instances require a commitment suited to predictable sustained usage. Exam tip. Use Spot for flexible testing and batch workloads that can tolerate interruption. Question number 113. Which of the following are benefits of the AWS Cloud? Choose 2. Option A. Trade variable expenses for capital expenses. Option B. High economies of scale. Option C. Launch globally in minutes. Option D. Focus on managing hardware infrastructure. E. Over-provision to ensure capacity. The correct answer is B. High economies of scale. C. Launch globally in minutes. Here's why. AWS aggregates usage to achieve economies of scale and lets customers deploy resources in global regions quickly. Why are the other options not correct? A. AWS trades capital or fixed expenses for variable expenses. D. AWS reduces the need to manage physical hardware. E. Elasticity reduces the need to over-provision capacity. Exam tip. AWS provides economies of scale, global reach, elasticity, and rapid deployment. Question number 114. A developer needs to maintain development and production environment infrastructure in a repeatable way. Which AWS service should the developer use to meet these requirements? Option A. AWS Ground Station. Option B. AWS Shield. Option C. AWS Lot Device Defender. Option D. AWS Cloud Formation. The correct answer is D. AWS Cloud Formation. Here's why. Cloud Formation templates create consistent, repeatable infrastructure for development and production environments. Why are the other options not correct? A. Ground Station communicates with satellites. B. AWS Shield provides DDoS protection. C. IoT Device Defender audits and monitors IoT device security. Exam tip. Cloud Formation provides repeatable infrastructure as code across environments. Question number 115. Which two benefits does consolidated billing provide for AWS cloud services? Choose 2. Option A. Volume discounts. Option B. A minimal additional fee for use. Option C. One bill for multiple accounts. Option D. Installment payment options. E. Custom cost and usage budget creation. The correct answer is A. Volume discounts. C. One bill for multiple accounts. Here's why. Consolidated billing combines account charges into one bill and aggregates eligible usage for volume pricing benefits. Why are the other options not correct? B. Consolidated billing has no additional service fee. D. It does not provide installment payment options. E. Custom budgets are created with AWS budgets, not consolidated billing itself. Exam tip. Consolidated billing simplifies payment and can aggregate usage for pricing benefits. Question number 116. Which AWS service is a hybrid cloud storage service that gives on-premises users access to virtually unlimited cloud storage? Option A. AWS DataSync. Option B. Amazon S3 Glacier. Option C. AWS Storage Gateway. Option D. Amazon Elastic Block Store, Amazon EBS. The correct answer is C. AWS Storage Gateway. Here's why. Storage Gateway connects on-premises applications to scalable AWS cloud storage by using familiar storage protocols. Why are the other options not correct? A. DataSync transfers data between storage locations. B. S3 Glacier storage classes provide archival object storage. D. EBS provides block storage for supported compute resources. Exam tip. Storage Gateway extends AWS storage into on-premises environments. Question number 117. Which of the following is a recommended design principle of the AWS well-architected framework? Option A. Reduce downtime by making infrastructure changes infrequently and in large increments. Option B. Invest the time to configure infrastructure manually. Option C. Learn from operational failures and improve. Option D. Use monolithic application design for centralization. The correct answer is C. learn to improve from operational failures. Here's why. Learning from operational events and failures supports continuous improvement under the operational excellence pillar. Why are the other options not correct? A. Prefer frequent, small, reversible changes instead of large and frequent changes. B. Manage infrastructure through code and automation rather than manual configuration. D. Loosely coupled components are generally preferred over monolithic dependencies. Exam tip. Treat operational failures as opportunities to learn and improve processes. Question number 118. An organization is running a workload in the AWS cloud. What AWS best practice helps ensure the most cost-effective architecture for the workload? Option A, loose coupling. Option B, right sizing. Option C, caching. Option D, redundancy. The correct answer is B, right sizing. Here's why. Right sizing matches resource types and capacity to actual workload requirements, avoiding unnecessary spending. Why are the other options not correct? A. Loose coupling improves component independence and resilience. C. Caching can improve performance, but is not the general cost optimization practice requested. D. Redundancy improves availability, but can increase resource cost. Exam tip. Right sizing prevents paying for more resource capacity than the workload needs. Question number 119. An organization needs to assess its operational readiness. It also needs to identify and mitigate any operational risks ahead of a new product launch. What AWS support plan offers guidance and support for this kind of event at no additional charge? Option A, AWS Business Support. Option B, AWS Basic Support. Option C, AWS Developer Support. Option D, AWS Enterprise Support. The correct answer is D, AWS Enterprise Support. Here's why. Enterprise support includes TAM-led AWS countdown guidance for readiness, risk mitigation, capacity planning, and critical launches. Why are the other options not correct? A. Business support does not include the same designated TAM-led launch guidance. B. Basic support does not provide technical event planning assistance. C. Developer support focuses on development guidance and lacks proactive launch support. Exam tip. Enterprise support provides proactive TAM guidance for critical events and launches. Question number 120. What AWS service offers command line access to AWS tools and resources from a web browser? Option A, AWS Cloud HSM. Option B, AWS Cloud Shell. Option C, Amazon Workspaces. Option D, AWS Cloud Map. The correct answer is B, AWS Cloud Shell. Here's why. Cloud Shell provides a browser-based shell with command line tools and authenticated access to AWS resources. Why are the other options not correct? A. Cloud HSM provides dedicated hardware security modules. C. Workspaces provides managed virtual desktops. D. Cloud Map provides service discovery for cloud resources. Exam tip. Cloud Shell provides ready-to-use AWS command line access in the browser. Question number 121. An organization needs to establish a schedule for rotating database user credentials. What AWS service can support this requirement with the least operational overhead? Option A, AWS Systems Manager. Option B, AWS Secrets Manager. Option C, AWS License Manager. Option D, AWS Managed Services. The correct answer is B, AWS Secrets Manager. Here's why. Secrets Manager securely stores credentials and supports scheduled automatic rotation with minimal operational effort. Why are the other options not correct? A. Systems Manager Parameter Store stores parameters, but lacks the same managed rotation workflow. C. License Manager manages software licenses. D. AWS Managed Services provides operational assistance for AWS environments. Exam tip. Use Secrets Manager when credentials require managed storage and automatic rotation. Question number 122. An organization needs to manage its AWS cloud resources through a web interface. What AWS service can satisfy this requirement? Option A, AWS Management Console. Option B, AWS CLI. Option C, AWS SDK. Option D, AWS Cloud 9. The correct answer is A. AWS Management Console. Here's why. The AWS Management Console provides a browser-based graphical interface for managing AWS services and resources. Why are the other options not correct? B. AWS CLI manages services through command line commands. C. AWS SDKs integrate AWS service APIs into applications. D. AWS Cloud 9 is a cloud-based development environment. Exam tip. Console is graphical, CLI is command line, and SDKs provide programmatic access. Question number 123. What task is the customer's responsibility under the AWS shared responsibility model? Option A. Maintain the security of the AWS cloud. Option B. Configure firewalls and networks. Option C. Patch the operating system of Amazon RDS instances. Option D. Implement physical and environmental controls. The correct answer is B. Configure firewalls and networks. Here's why. Customers configure network access controls, security groups, network ACLs, and application connectivity. Why are the other options not correct? A. AWS maintains security of the underlying cloud infrastructure. C. AWS patches the operating system for the managed Amazon RDS service. D. AWS implements physical and environmental controls in its data centers. Exam tip. AWS secures cloud infrastructure. Customers configure access and network security. You have completed part 2 of the CLF-C02 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.